Good morning, everybody. This is our last video lecturette for you this morning. And today we're talking about whether theology can make a claim to being knowledge, and if so, what kind of knowledge. We highlighted this issue last week, but it's worth mentioning again here. Odin is working kind of counterintuitively, certainly in a modern context, which wants to set questions of theological epistemology right at the beginning. And it becomes an extended exercise in kind of throat clearing, the things that have to be said before you really say anything substantial. And we mentioned last time that in the modern era, the great exponent of this extended kind of prolegomena was Friedrich Schleiermacher, with his insistence on just what piety is. It is not knowledge. It is not action. It is a feeling, again, not an emotion, but the German word is Gefühl, and it's kind of like a full orientation, I think is probably the best way to translate that word, but it's a difficult word to translate. It's not simply an emotion. Piety is a feeling, and then dogmatics is the Christian affections set forth in speech. It's an attempt to give a rational account of this pious feeling. So we're not talking about God, we're talking about our feeling of absolute dependence upon God. And any doctrine that helps expand our understanding of this feeling of absolute dependence is treated with great respect. Any doctrine that is ancillary to or irrelevant to the feeling of absolute dependence is simply passed over briefly or ignored. You might want to see Schleiermacher's treatment of the biblical miracles here, where his argument is basically, whereas once they were needed for a foundation of faith, now that we know what piety is, as this feeling of absolute dependence, whether we believe in miracles or not has nothing to do with piety. So you can believe in them if you wish, you can ignore them if you wish. They are simply irrelevant to the thoughtful life of faith, and so set aside. This is a pretty classic kind of move in laying the parameters for what counts as theology, how theology can make a claim upon knowledge. And so Schleiermacher places his theological epistemology right at the start. Now, Schleiermacher is not the only theologian to do this, and this is certainly not the exclusive exercise of theologians on the more liberal end of the Protestant theological spectrum. Conservative theologians following the Protestant scholastics also can place a very heavy emphasis on theological epistemology right at the start of the dogmatic enterprise. You think here, maybe if you're from a more evangelical background, someone like Wayne Grudem. On the more conservative end, it's questions of inspiration, the inspiration and inerrancy of Holy Scripture tend to come right at the start and ground our notion of theology as a claim upon knowledge, as a claim upon truth. Barth is the great exception. He just dives right in at the doctrine of the Trinity and the doctrine of revelation, and doesn't get to his doctrine of Holy Scripture until later in his dogmatic enterprise. So Odin places his right at the last, and you might want to think about that. Why does he leave the role of reason in theological reflection until the very end? That's a question for you to think about. The issue, it seems to me, revolves around the notion of epistemology, our attempt to understand what knowledge is and how knowledge works in the human mind. What does a proposition have to do or have to be in order to be understood as true, as knowledge, as opposed to opinion or unverified belief? And I think Odin's concern, though he doesn't come right out and say it, but I think it's there. Odin's concern is a legitimate one. If we wait until we have all our epistemological ducks in a row before we can say anything about God, which is what theology is, we'll never really get to saying anything about God, or what we say about God will always be dependent upon a particular epistemological theory which could be overturned. And this has, in fact, happened, and can be tremendously damaging. When a particular theology is dependent upon a particular epistemology, and then that epistemology is discredited, we're left with having to do some pretty serious damage control. So, Oden prefers to simply lay out the contents of the doctrine of God, and then at the end reflect on the place of reason in theological reflection and how or whether theological reflection can make a claim to knowledge. The question that you're going to be working on this week is how theological language functions as knowledge, or whether it functions as knowledge. Specifically, is it more akin to the natural sciences or to the social sciences or the arts? We might say, the natural sciences make the strongest claim upon knowledge. Certainly today, in a culture that values science almost to the degree that it has become scientism, a religion of its own, there might be some affinities between theology and the natural sciences that you want to explore. Maybe you will side more with Oden and say it's not so much a natural science as it is a social science, insofar as it arises out of a particular community and it embraces many fields. It's not so much an independent field of its own as it incorporates or reflects upon or draws from all kinds of fields. You can take that into consideration. Or you can take a more classic view and say it's more like one of the arts. It's more like history, for example, or literary study than it is either like biology, a natural science, or sociology or psychology, a social science. So that's your question for reflection. I don't know that there is a right answer, but whatever answer you do give, it will determine the rest of the shape of your theological project. So it does merit careful thought, and I think now is a good time for you to engage in it. Just a quick note before we go. The dialogue between theology and the natural sciences is a very, very hot topic right now. There are lots of good articles and books being published in this field. The BioLogos Forum, I'll let you Google that, is a good place to get up to speed on the relevant issues. Tends to focus on evolution and creation, those kinds of debates, but also treats theology and science more generally. So that would be a good place for you to look. I'm a big fan of Alvin Plantinga on these issues, both with respect to theological epistemology and the tension or alleged tension between theology and the natural sciences. On theological epistemology, his trilogy on warrant, a little bit older now, but it's very good. Warranted belief, warrant and proper function, and then warranted Christian belief. They're published by Oxford University Press. That trilogy is a really, really good, both general epistemology in the first two volumes, and then a good kind of natural theology or foundation for dogmatic theology in the third volume, where Plantinga deals with Christian beliefs specifically in relation to the epistemology he's just sketched. I think that's a really, really solid piece of philosophy of religion, Christian philosophy of religion, and I recommend it highly if you're interested in theological epistemology. And then his little book, Where the Conflict Really Lies, is a great primer on the relationship between theology and science. And Plantinga's argument is that while there is a surface conflict between theology and science, there is deep agreement between theology and science, between Christian theology specifically and science. And then conversely, he also argues that while there is surface agreement between scientific materialism as an ideology and scientific practice, while there's surface agreement between those two things, there is deep disagreement. They are, in fact, finally fundamentally incompatible. That's a very go for the jugular kind of argument, that science actually depends upon at least a commitment to theism, and perhaps more strongly a commitment to Christian theism, is where the conflict really lies. I think that's a great book. The chapter on intelligent design as a way of speaking as opposed to a particular theory, I think is really, really good and very helpful way into various kinds of ID arguments, which can get kind of thorny. So I recommend both of those to you if you want to take your reading in these kinds of issues further. So that's all I have to say about the reading for this week and the question. I do want to remind you that your paper is due on December 11th. I'm still happy to field questions up until the time. Only 3 of you have done so. You know, it's better for you if you do. Please communicate with me via my Hotmail address, which is included in your syllabus. I look forward to talking with you if you want to do that. But whether you speak with me or not, your paper, if you're writing one, is due on December 11th. I look forward to receiving it. There are 2 ways that you can send it to me. You can send it as a Google Doc to my Trinity address, or my preferred way is that you send it as a Word document to my Hotmail address. That there is no great pedagogical reason for that preference. It's simply easier for me. So if you would do that for me, I would be very grateful. Of course, making life easier for me will not influence your mark in any way. That's a little joke. But if you do that, that'd be great. But I will start checking my Trinity email just in case you send it there. But my preference would be if you send it as a Word document to my Hotmail, and I will send an edited copy with a grade back to you as soon as I've marked it. So they're due on December 11th. You hand them in early, it's not going to hurt you. That's a good rule. Also, better to hand in something rather than nothing. That's a good rule. If life has intervened and you're not able to get your paper in on time, you'll note that I don't grant extensions, but that doesn't mean I won't accept a late paper. It means you need to submit with your late paper a reason, and I will take that reason into account when I grade it, okay? So it's always better to submit something. But I don't grant extensions because we can't plan on emergencies. Emergencies happen whether we plan or not. So if an emergency has come up in your life and you're unable to submit on time, I get that. When you submit your paper, please submit it with a reason, and I will grade it, okay? And we'll get your mark back to you just as quickly as we can. So your papers are due on December 11th. And remember, the final discussion, that this question on the reasoning of Revelation, the final discussion wraps up on December the 16th. So you have your essays done in a week, your initial essays done in a week, and then you have your discussion done by the Friday following. And I hope that that goes well for you. I am enjoying very much kind of lurking on your discussions. I think you're getting the material and making some really insightful comments. So I guess the bulk of work is now mine to do. It is to finish up reading over your essays and your responses, and it is to receive and grade your papers. And I really look forward to doing that. I've enjoyed the opportunity to dig into Odin again. I've enjoyed meeting some of you electronically over the email, and I hope you had a good course. And we'll talk to you soon. Advent blessings to you all, and a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bye, everybody.